welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your No Swords for Zelda host, Madelyn.
I'm your girl power host, Emma.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. It's Emma's side quest here in our rare same room Talk This recording session.
Yeah. So if I sound like I'm in one of your ears and Madeline sounds like she's in the other,
then it's just like you're sitting there.
It's just
at
like
the mic.
you're right there. Yeah, exactly.
But Emma, what are we talking about in one year and out the other this week?
This week, we're talking about female protagonists in games.
Woohoo!
Which, we've done one semi-recently, although I feel like when I looked it up, it was longer ago than I thought it was.
That is the Talk This curse, isn't it?
But we did one semi-recently on, like, gender expression in general in games, specifically talking mostly about games where you can pick between male or female or anywhere in between, depending on the game.
Not
right?
often anywhere in between, but occasionally.
Occasionally anywhere in between. But this time I wanted to talk, like, specifically about, like, defined, named, I was gonna say written. The other ones are written, too, but, like, more written.
Mandatory women.
Scripted, female protagonists.
Yes. Not so many of those.
You know, there's more.
Yes.
I was, part of the reason, well, this wasn't part of the reason, but something I was reflecting on as we did this is I feel like Sony, in particular, has made, like, a concentrated effort, almost, that a lot of their, like, big titles... Oh, it was inspiration, because I was thinking a little bit about Ghost of Yote was announced at the Tokyo Game Show, which is the follow-up to Ghosts of Tsushima, and features a female protagonist this time.
She's a lady this time.
She's a lady this time. It's like, it's not a sequel, because, well, it's a sequel in the sense that it comes after, but it's like 400 years after Tsushima or something.
Hey, we don't get enough of those. Wasn't I just talking about that a couple weeks ago? Maybe last week? Who knows? About, like, we don't do the, like, sequel 400 years in the future very much anymore, so good for them.
Yeah. But a female protagonist this time, and I was just sort of reflecting that, like, in a lot of its, like, big budget prestige titles now, Sony has sort of moved towards and pushed for having a female protagonist.
They got a little embarrassed about the dad game allegations.
Yeah, a little bit.
They were like, we did dads. Now, have you heard from the studios that brought you dads?
Have you heard of daughters?
Women. Specifically daughters, mostly.
Yeah.
But have you heard of the female?
Which, like, you know, people like to razz Horizon Zero Dawn for always releasing at the worst possible time for it. But I do think, like, the success of that game and Alloy was very convincing in terms of, like, oh, okay, we can make big budget games with a female protagonist and it won't have an impact on our sales.
Well, as we'll talk about, I'm sure later this episode, man, there's some bleak stuff from really only about a decade ago about this, just all over the internet. Really yikes-inducing stuff.
Anyway, the other aspect that I was thinking about, besides of Ghost of Yote, was the release of Echoes of Wisdom.
Right.
Which is technically the second, apparently, but the first was pretty bad. It seems to be the consensus. But the first sort of major Zelda game that features Zelda as the playable protagonist.
Fun fact, it has been advertised seemingly non-stop at, like, a bus terminal that I walk by.
Yeah.
At least once a week. Always the same one. Always advertising The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom.
They want you to buy it.
I don't know that I internalized that it was a game where Zelda was the protagonist, though.
Yes.
I mean, I know it now, but the marketing was not, like, girl power.
I think on purpose, actually.
Yeah.
And then earlier this year? Last year?
I'm gonna need
they
more
also
context.
made the first Princess Peach sort of starring game.
More context did not help. Sometime recently.
Yeah. Princess Peach Showtime also came out from Nintendo. So Nintendo has also been like, okay, I guess now we can make games about girls.
Sort of.
Yeah. Sorta. We do it.
Yeah. Girls are in.
Girls are in. That's what they're saying over
Nintendo.
Nintendo.
It's a brat summer.
Another fun fact.
Okay.
Echoes of Wisdom, also the first major Zelda game to have a female director.
Wow. To be fair to Nintendo, those guys have been in their jobs for a long time. You know?
Sure.
Like, it's the same guys.
Yeah, that's
more
true.
or less.
Yeah.
That's its own problem, maybe. But, like, you know, there's just not a job. Who's going to direct? The same 6 guys have done all the directing.
They don't direct as much
Okay,
anymore.
you're right. I don't understand how games work, but you know what I mean.
They just kind of oversee things now.
Yeah.
So
same guys come in and say, not sure about that.
Miyamoto tweets, you know, he goes, "This is Miyamoto."
This is Miyamoto. He probably does that whenever he talks to anyone.
I think so, too.
He comes in, he goes, "This is Miyamoto."
Yeah.
Not sure about Zelda having a sword.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought the interviews about Echoes of Wisdom was really interesting and really sort of complex to think about.
Yeah.
Because, you know, they talked a little bit in interviews, all the big guys.
All the
wigs,
Nintendo guys.
The
whose
Nintendo
names
guys,
you know.
yeah. About, like, not wanting Zelda to feel like her own character. There's one interview on the Nintendo side about Echoes of Wisdom that was like, oh, you know, if we give Zelda a sword and shield, then what's Link gonna do?
Right.
You know?
They're very dedicated to Link as you know, the protagonist.
Yes. But when they were first making this game, it was a Link game, but they started to feel like the sword and shield was getting in the way of sort of the puzzle-based, you learn echoes in this and then use them to solve puzzles and combat encounters.
And echoes are like, you like summon monsters to fight
monsters,
for you, right?
also like beds and pots and stuff.
Sure.
So you can use a combination of things to approach things. And they started to feel like the sword and shield was sort of getting in the way, and that players would always sort of default to that instead of experimenting with the echoes. They're like, maybe Link doesn't fit here.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually they landed on, well, maybe with Zelda.
Yeah. But then they also had to do a lot of, like, how do we create a conflict for this game, given that Zelda has been existent in this lore for, like, 30 plus years and not gotten out there and fight. Like, how do we create lore for this game such that the princess leaves? They seem to have really grappled with this.
I know. It's not even true.
I know. But it's weird. It was very central to both of these interviews.
In, like, either Wind Waker or, like, Spirit Tracks, she has, like, a pirate form.
She's, like, possessed, right? In Spirit Tracks, they talked about this in this one. Her soul has left her body. It's, like, not really her. Or she's a ghost.
But there's also, I don't know what game it is, but the Sheik transformation that's in Smash Bros. Is also her.
Yeah.
And they did make a Musou game for Breath of the Wild where she does use her rapier.
Right.
So it's not like she's never fought before, but I do sort of respect the idea of, like, well, you know, this isn't really a character. We don't want to just make her like Link.
Yeah, she's not a warrior now.
Yeah, we don't want to just put her in the role of Link and call that a day and say, there's your Zelda game, right? Which, for some people, I'm sure they'd be happy with that. But I do
many people would be happy with that.
I do sort of see the issue there,
I'm sympathetic to it. I just also think the people want Zelda to fight.
Yes, but the flip side of this is there is a mechanic in the game called, like, sword fighter form.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have, like, a meter and you can pick up stuff around that fills this meter. And when you fill this meter, Zelda, like, dons, like, Link's spirit and is able to use, like, a sword and shield temporarily.
Yeah.
Like, if you played Melody of Memory, like Kairi at the end of Melody of Memory.
Inspired by.
When she summons the Soul of Sora to fight for her.
Whatever. Kingdom Hearts has had 1/3 plus whatever percentage of a game you want to allocate to 0.1 of female protagonists, which we are going to find is pretty high.
There's also the part in 358 over 2 days where you have a stick and Xion has to help you.
Okay, sure, great.
Does
So we'll
that
add
count?
that in. You know, I guess you can choose to play as a female character in the mobile games.
Yeah,
That's not what we're talking about today, though.
I do. Anyway, just to finish the thought on the sword fighter form, it does feel a little lazy to me. it feels like there's any number of things they could have done to give, like, Zelda limited combat abilities.
Sure.
To do things during boss fights, which is where you would mostly be using this, honestly. And it feels a little lazy to be like, oh, she just, turns into Link.
Like, puzzle games are hard. Okay? Cut them a break.
Yeah.
It's hard to set it up so they'll puzzle.
I also read, like, mostly jokey Polygon article. I didn't put it in the notes, but, like, it was about, like, they were personally bothered that she can only make smoothies in Echoes of Wisdom. Like, the previous two games, Link could, like, cook.
I'm sorry, because of cooking, which she's only allowed to make
food,
smoothies.
but she makes smoothies, which it's kind of weird to, like, why not just call them potions? Like, that's what it's sort of been previously. It's
like a Ring Fit homage.
Yeah, maybe it's that. They're really into smoothies over at Nintendo right now. It was mostly a joke, to be fair, and mostly, like, a personal thing.
Yeah.
But
I mean, she's a princess. She doesn't know how to cook.
Right. She can only make smoothies. That's what princesses are known for.
She's allowed to make. It's all she's allowed to make.
Smoothie making.
It's a commentary on the patriarchal society she lives in.
But I on the Kingdom Hearts point you're making, I do think it can be telling to, like, pick any long running franchise, right, and just, like, do some counting.
Yeah.
Like, Kingdom Hearts, I'll give it a little bit of a pass, right? A lot of it's Sora. Right?
Yeah.
Though there's, like, a consistent sort of protagonist.
Right.
So,
it's the one guy.
Yeah. It gets the,
most.
Nice job, honey.
Yeah.
But you look at stuff like, I was thinking of Tales of, which has 1.5 female protagonists,
I believe.
a little
less excusable when it's an anthology series.
Final Fantasy, which, when they started adding women, it's been somewhat balanced since then.
Sure. I mean, 15, though, feel like big setback.
15 was just balancing out 10, too.
I'm just kidding. It's just that it's for the boys.
But that has, Yuna and Tentu, Lightning and Sarah in the 13 trilogy. Terra is, like, the face of Final Fantasy VI, even though that's, I've been told, is more of, like, an ensemble thing. I don't know. Final Fantasy 17 will feature a female protagonist.
Will it?
I'm leaking it here.
Oh, okay. I see.
I'm saying it. I'm speaking it into the world.
Probably.
Stuff like Silent Hill has one, you could go on. I think we talked about Trails of last week. That has just Estelle.
Yeah.
And if I'm being charitable, you could say Yuna's the protagonist for parts of 3 and 4.
Sure.
But yeah, it is interesting to think about, I think.
There's not a lot. And of course, it's not helping any of these long-running series percentages that, of course, like, game development time is slowing down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So you've got this, like, like, big deficit from years when, like, there's no way this would have happened, where you were cranking out a game a year.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, we can do, like, one every 3 if we're moving pretty fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, a little tricky. But yeah, it's bleak out there. E3 doesn't exist anymore.
No.
Right? But that's just newsflash, I guess.
Just in case you didn't know.
In case you missed that, E3 doesn't exist anymore. But all of the sort of, like, stats...
Neither does Feminist Frequency, for what it's worth. Who would do this?
Someone else would have picked this up if E3 still existed, I think. Someone would have carried the death threat mantle.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right.
But I don't think at any point in E3 did it crack 20% of required women.
Oh, 20%.
Yeah.
I put 10% in.
I did, and I saw that you said it hit 19% with, like, some Sony thing.
2020.
In 2020. Which, okay, I guess.
I mean, it hit it overall. It's just that most of them were from Sony's show.
Right.
Was what the notes said.
Yes. But for the most part, throughout the late teens, it was sub 10% of required woman lead. Now, the caveat here, of course, is that for all of these shows, like, more than 50% of the games showcased, you get to choose.
Yes.
But as the Feminist Frequency blog made the point over and over and over, that's not the same as, like, forcing people to engage with a story where the protagonist being a woman is central to the storytelling. And frankly, you know, if you're choosing the gender of your character, like, how much of that is really, like, you're playing as a man, but we've skinned you as something different, right? Yeah. Probably most of them.
Yes. So, one of the interesting trends of, like, the increasing female main characters in games, I think, is both, like, the Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man sort of effect, which I think, like, with stuff like Ghost of Yote, you can kind of see of being like, okay, we made the successful game. Now we can put the woman in. Wife. Now we can put the woman in.
Yeah.
And also the daughterification of video games, which is a term made up by some smart people who actually write about it.
Yep.
There's the Last of Us 2 review by Julie Muncie is, like, one of my favorite sort of reviews I've read that really goes into, like, this idea of the daughterification of games, of, like, you know, a lot of people upon playing the dad game, right, which I'm sure we've talked about.
We've done a whole podcast on the dad game before.
But a lot of people would find, like, the daughter the more interesting character, right, because of the role that she would be put into.
Right, which I do want to call out is sort of, like, both, like, I think some of, like, just, like, that statement on its own is almost a little unfair, right? Like, of course the player character is always going to be a little bit less interesting.
I don't think that's true.
Maybe not, of course, but this particular kind of, like, gruff, like, hard on the outside, soft on the inside dad character that's at the center of all these games is naturally going to have a little bit less. It's not that it has to be. I don't know. It's something about, like, reading that statement a couple of times struck me as, like, of course we like these characters better.
Here's a counter example.
Yeah.
Who's more interesting, Kiryu or Haruka?
We spend so much more time with Kiryu, though.
I'm just saying.
And I think Haruka might be more interesting if you were to just lean into, like, the story.
Sure.
Right?
Okay.
Like, if we cut out all the fun that we have with Kiryu, like, he's in prison for, like, the vast majority of the time of the games. So, like, maybe Haruka trying to become an idol is interesting enough that it's more interesting than anything he does. You're fair. It's fair, of course, but that's a genre thing, right? Like, I do feel like these dad games, it's something about the way they're constructed is that the point is that you are kind of the dad, and so of course he's going to be a little bit less interesting. Anyway,
this review sort of goes on to be like, well, you know, like, it's sort of a response to that of being like, okay, but we can do that too, right?
Yeah.
We can do the daughter game too,
yeah.
Right? She can have her own thing.
Yeah.
And you can see this in, like, The Last of Us 2, The Walking Dead. This was the reviewer even points out, like, Nier Automata is kind of a daughter game, less directly.
Sure.
But you do play as a dad in the first one.
Is Atreus? I'm not so well versed in the Ragnarok.
I think you play it. It's sort of like you play as Atreus in the sort of Last of Us 1 type way where you play as Ellie sometimes.
Okay, do you feel like he becomes more central, though? I'm just curious. Like, is the Sun game also?
Maybe a little bit,
There's not as many Sun games.
Yeah,
I'm
there's
just
not
wondering.
as many Sun games.
What's weird, by the way? Weird that there's not as many Sun games. Probably something to be dug into psychologically about that, but anyway.
But one common way you can critique these games is a lot of times the daughter game is still very much about the dad.
Yeah.
And about that relationship, more than it is necessarily about, like, the individual growth of the daughter, right?
Yeah.
Because these people wrote the dad games a lot of times because they became dads,
sure,
right? There's a lot of documentation of this from Western developers,
right,
especially.
I mean, we like to write what we know, right?
Yeah.
This whole podcast ultimately just boils down to, like, well, there's not nearly as many women working in games, and there's certainly not nearly as many women in, like, head writer positions in games, and so, like, people write what they know, and so we get games about, like, young to middle-aged men.
Yes. But so when you turn to the daughter, sometimes you continue to write what you know, and or what you would
think
like,
you know.
What you think you know, or what you would like your daughter to think about you, or whatever. There was another article on Kill Screen about this a little bit too that was a little bit more positive about the trend, I think. And it's definitely interesting thinking about, like, I remember when The Walking Dead season 2 came out, there's a scene in the first episode where Clementine has to, like, stitch herself back up.
Mm-hmm.
And people were like, this is, exploitative, this is, excuse my language, I guess, torture porn, this is
right,
whatever.
We don't think about that when it's a dude doing it.
Yeah, but that wasn't as much of a complaint when Lee had to, like, chop his arm off in one part of the first game, right?
No, we have different cultural expectations of violence and, like, pain around women, both in ways that are probably not very, like, great in terms of promoting equality or whatever, but also in ways that's like, oh yeah, it is probably more good that we are in some ways paying more attention to, like, violence inflicted on female bodies in the same way we would pay more attention to violence inflicted on any marginalized group.
Sure. This Kill Screen article also talked about that they think it's a good and interesting thing of, like, forcing players to think about how, like, a little teen girl thinks about survival, right? Like, they talk about, like, oh, will you play, like, the I'm just a sweet little girl card, or will you try to keep, like, your sort of integrity or pride or whatever, right? And the sort of bargains that you do there that's different from the bargains that an adult man, even a black adult man,
right,
like Lee is, would have to do for their survival.
Yeah. But we still don't like it when girls get hurt.
I mean, I think Yakuza is a very interesting thing for this. They've talked about, oh, we'll keep making middle-aged male games, right? Which is what people like them for, to be fair.
They're about middle-aged men.
They're about middle-aged men and about middle-aged men's concerns.
And they are much more about, I say much, coming from, like, very little at all. They are much more about women now than Yakuza 1.
But I don't think they will ever let you, this is a weird way to phrase this, I don't think they will ever let you punch a woman.
Not until you're playing as one.
And I don't know, do you think, like, really, I know Haruka had her dance battles.
I do think it's shocking that they let Haruka be one of the 5.
Yeah.
Just in hindsight.
I mean, it's wild that they're like, there's just a whole section where your main gameplay mechanic is rhythm game.
It's sick. It's so sick. I love Yakuza 5. I don't care. I've been seeing a lot of, like, Yakuza 5 hate online lately. I don't care. Yakuza 5 is peak.
But I kind of doubt, like, because of their stated ethos, that they will ever really have, like, I know they have playable female characters now, too,
right.
Which, whatever, that's a step forward, right?
Yeah.
Women can punch now.
You can hit them with your purse.
But I don't think they'll ever move back to, like, having a POV female character, really. I know we talk about, like, the Jungi Sunhee Gaiden game, but they're not smart enough to make that, honestly.
I don't know, man. The pirate game has cracked everything wide open. Like, who knows what they'll do? You just don't know.
That's fair.
I think there's a possibility of a Gaiden game. I do. I wish they would. I just want them to let Haruka fight. They won't.
They won't. But she's a mom now. She doubly can't fight.
I know. Ichiban's mom. Ichiban's mom is tough. Ichimom is kind of tough.
No,
she doesn't fight, but she's like a tough cookie.
Okay, but she does not fight.
Can we get Daigo's mom back? Lady Dojima really wasted.
It's not like there haven't been women who fight in the games. It's just you never fight them.
Yeah.
And only recently have they been allowed to fight.
Yes.
And also, even as an AI, Kiryu will not punch
a woman. But that's really funny. Like, that's just a joke. Like, that's just a really funny thing. No, I would not be surprised to see a spin-off game eventually. If only one where they're like, the game is Cabaret Club now. I would take that. I'm waiting for that game.
I'm waiting for Judgment 3 Amasawa June game.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
That's me.
Yeah, we are discounting the parts of Judgment where you play as Saori.
Duh.
Your favorite part.
My favorite part. It was, like, fine in the first game, right? There are some interesting interviews about it, but then they were just like, what if it was worse in the second? What if it happened again and sucked harder in the second game?
You know?
That'd be cool, wouldn't it?
No, we'll see. I think one day. I do. But man, so we've been talking about now, right? Where it's like, oh, there are women in games.
Yeah.
Like, we have lady protagonists running around, even if we have to, like, Trojan horse them into existing series. And even if we still freak out about Star Wars or Grand Theft Auto or whatever, right?
Right.
But man, not very long ago, it was real bad out there.
Tell me about it, Madelyn.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously, we've talked a little bit like the very early days of this, right? The Ms. Pac-Mans, there's a whole smattering of, like, arcade women protagonists, right? And of course, Lara Croft of the conic breasts.
Metroid. Nintendo did have very early female protagonists.
Yes. Now, do we really feel like... here's my feeling about Metroid, though. Like, good, right? Cool for gaming history that it worked out that way. But, like, the intent here was not, like, female empowerment. The intent was, like, congrats. She's in a bikini.
Yeah.
Like, fun little reward for you.
Yeah, but you know what? They locked themselves in
They
down
did.
the line.
They did get trapped. I was surprised to find so many people online saying, like, Samus is, like, between 15 and 17.
Really?
It's vocal contingent.
I mean, I don't know. I feel like the main narrative game that they've made for Metroid is Other M, which is contentious, to say the least.
Sure.
So maybe they say her age there, or imply her age.
I don't think they ever actually, I don't know, it's implied somewhere. I didn't dig too much into this, but it does play into the broader trend of, like, you can, like, count on one hand the number of women protagonists who are, like, over 30.
Yeah, you got Returnal.
Maybe that's it.
Maybe I feel like always we have to say we are talking about, like, big games here,
of
right?
Course.
I feel like you cannot, like, count every single game that's been released on itch.io or whatever.
Of course not.
In terms of, like, statistically quantifying everything.
Firmly in AA, AAA territory here, and, like, notable
and
indie
ascended
territory.
indie.
So yes, of course, there's lots of pick any identity category, and there are probably lots of at least interesting games with a protagonist of that category that you can find.
Yeah.
But there's no money behind any of those games. But yeah, like, so really notable, one, like, study that got bandied around a lot was from 2012. It's from, I'm gonna, like, look up exactly what this organization was. The EEDAR, which is the Electronic Entertainment Design and Research organization. And they did a study in 2012 where they looked at, like, all sorts of games, right? To look at, representation of female protagonists and also, like, what that meant in terms of sales. So it was only, like, 24 games out of, like, 600 games that fell into, like, they had a female protagonist. This was 2012. And so they said, in terms of pure sales numbers, in the first 3 months of availability, games with only a male hero sold about 25% better than games with an optional female hero. So, like, where you could choose. And games with exclusively male heroes sold about 75% better than games where you had to play as a woman. Which is crazy.
Yeah.
Those are crazy numbers. Now, they go on to say, when we look at marketing budgets, we see that these games that are female-led only have about 40% of the marketing budget of a male-led game on average. Small sample size, whatever, right? So that's definitely something at play. But when you see all of these interviews from throughout the 2010s of these, like, game execs being like, well, we'd like to have a woman, but I don't know.
Yeah.
It reads really stupid now. But man, when you see those stats, you're like, oh, like, I'd be kind of spooked.
I do feel like sometimes, like you said, though, like, they have 40% of the marketing budget.
Right.
Like, sometimes you get
it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, for sure.
Yes.
Still, though, it does shine a slightly different light on some of those quotes for me, because I read those quotes now and I'm like, you're an idiot. Like, how could you be this dumb? You're really dumb. But then, like, I guess if you had that, like, study put in front of you, you'd have to take it seriously. Even if you, like, have the caveat of, like, they weren't really marketed. Like, 75% less well, that's horrifying.
Again, though, this study is comparing 24 games to, like, how many?
Like 600 plus, something like that. Yeah.
So that's worth thinking about, too, is the sample size there.
Yes. No, lots of things to think about.
Yeah.
Still frightening and horrifying and bad.
Yeah.
Right? So there's all this stuff. There's all these anecdotes about from the late 2000s and 2010s of people being like, well, we don't know about this, right? So this is even true, like, all the way up to Horizon, right? That team was always like, we want to make this game. I mean, that game is about, like, a matriarchal society,
yes.
right? So, like, of course the plan would always be to have a female protagonist. I guess I say of course. I'm sure not of course. And in fact, not of course, right? So, like, they did, like, an interview with Shuhei Yoshida, who's, like, the guy,
yeah,
right, at Sony. And he was like, we were nervous about it, right? They were like, you know, like, we were supportive, but, like, we definitely had to talk about it, and we did a lot of focus testing. Which is, again, you know, Horizon's development started all the way back in 2010, so, like, a big period of change, of course, but, like, crazy. 2017, when this came out, was only 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And they were like, we don't know about this game that's, like, very much about women.
Yeah.
We don't know about leading that with a woman. Like, what are you talking about? And that's not even, like, the bad one, right? That one, they made the game. We've talked about Sleeping Dogs on this show before, and I'm sure that we must have talked about this to some extent on that episode, but I didn't remember the extent of the horrors of it. So Sleeping Dogs went through, like, a lot of things before becoming Sleeping Dogs. Was initially going to be a game called Black Lotus, where Lucy Liu was going to play, like, the lead. And when they took it to Activision, this is a quote, there was a great overview on this on a website called The Next Web from 2020 by Rachel Kasser. That was basically like, and they said this in a quote, that they told the developers to, quote, lose the chick. So, like, basically was the idea of, like, this has to be Grand Theft Auto, and so we can't have a girl.
Yeah. Imagine Grand Theft Auto with a girl.
If they ever release that game, we'll have to.
Unimaginable.
Actually, I was seeing that in the first couple of Grand Theft Autos where your character does not matter, you can choose to play as a woman.
Hey. There you go.
And then it went away. But yeah, by the end, Lucy Liu plays, like, a prostitute. Side character prostitute. So, nice. Great. We love that. And then also there's, like, this is all over the place, like, the Assassin's Creed. I mean, Ubisoft, not the greatest place to be a woman.
No.
For a long time.
No.
And, like, literally every Assassin's Creed game, seemingly, that was released in, like, the 2010s, seemingly originally had plans to have, like, a female protagonist, or at least, like, a very centered dual female character that ultimately got sidelined because they didn't feel good about it. So, like, Odyssey was originally just gonna have Cassandra, and then they were like, no.
And, you know, everybody loves, I don't even know the male character's name.
Alexios.
Because everybody plays Cassandra.
I'm just saying.
It's just funny, because it's just like, I guess they could tell. The players could tell which one was the prioritized one.
Syndicate, the Evie, who I think you do play some in the game, was originally supposed to be, like, a dual protagonist and, like, wasn't. And then Origins, Aya, who, again, like, I think you play a little bit in the game, was really supposed to, like, take over as the protagonist at some point. All of that scrapped because they were afraid it wouldn't sell. And because there were some bad people there. But ostensibly because they were afraid it wouldn't sell.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
This is not that long ago.
Yeah. I did, Quantic Foundry put out a report in 2021, that, you know, they do, like, player motivation analysis stuff. And according to their findings, about 1 in 3 male players prefer a female protagonist versus, like, I don't remember what it was for women. Women was like 95% prefer a female protagonist or something. Sure. Which I did think was interesting.
Yeah.
In terms of, like, the female audience is more not opposed to a male protagonist, but they're much more welcoming to a female protagonist.
Sure. I mean, they're hungry for it.
The male audience isn't even necessarily that against it.
Yeah.
Which is super interesting.
It really is.
In this sort of study.
Well, they want their Lara Crofts, right?
Sure. I guess.
Important to note also, right? Like, I mean, one, we haven't even really made that much progress. One. But two, the progress that we've made has pretty much exclusively been white women and like young, able-bodied white women.
Yes. There was Ash Parrish wrote I think it was like Returnal, when Returnal was announced or something.
Something like that.
About like, sorry if your white female lead doesn't seem progressive or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of it's definitely centered on white women. Is the sort of the way protagonists have gone. And of course, we've just been talking about female protagonists. The only like major game that I can think of with like a non-binary protagonist written is like Chris in Deltarune. And that's it.
Ascended indie.
Yeah, and that's an ascended indie.
Yeah. It's even really bad if you there's an interesting study about just like dialogue in games. It's not even necessarily protagonist specific. It was some academics who looked at dialogue in a lot of RPG series. And they found that 94% had more male dialogue than female dialogue. And you might say, okay, sure, but like most of them are probably just men, right? But this included games that centered women or featured multiple female protagonists, like Final Fantasy X too. The ladies just don't even get to talk. Female characters also more likely than male characters to like express just one emotion. Basically, I don't know how you like study that, but per this study, they are much more likely to have like much less complex, even for like for minor characters in particular, representation. And while that dialogue has been increasing, we won't reach gendered yapping parity until 2036.
Yeah. I did, there was one article that talked about, like, there was one other Peach game before Princess Peach Showtime, and in that one, it was like she controlled things with her emotions.
Yeah.
So, like, she had to cry to get water to fall, and if she was angry, she got lit on fire, and if she was in a good mood, she'd restore some health, which, like, theoretically that could work for a game, but it is a little bit like it's when it's your first Peach game.
I know, it's like unfortunate.
You're this woman and her emotions, you know?
Yeah. That'd be dope, like a man emotion game.
Yeah.
Which, you know, we're perpetuating this, but it did strike me a few times as I was researching this. Like there was one, it was a good article, it's like on Sci-Fi, it was about the evolution of female protagonists over the course of like a decade. Right? And, like, good article. But it did strike me as I got to the end of it, like, oh, like, the idea of writing this about
See, you
men.
said this, but I think that'd be a really interesting article.
I know, now I'm, like, gonna do a side quest that's, like, male protagonists.
Yeah, because I do think that there's an interesting sort of evolution in the way that male protagonists have been done.
Yes.
Also.
I think that that's right. And but I also think that would be a very different type of article. Like, the let us do lists of female protagonists in games is like let's count them up.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And like let's say that they were here. And we might do a little bit of analysis of like, oh, like Lara Croft wears clothes now, right? But she always wore clothes.
And also dies very violently.
Right.
For
like
some
we might do a
reason.
tiny little bit of like overtime analysis, but mostly these articles or these like listicles even are just being like, look, there's 26 of them,
Woo-hoo.
you know? And like, can you, like, I'd love that list of like male protagonists in games. I want the gamer to do one for me. Like,
I didn't look. Maybe they do have best male protagonists in games.
I'm gonna look right now. No. It does not. The first gamer article that comes up when I search that is ranking the best video game heroes of all time. Which,
okay.
Uh-oh.
Good.
Ruh-roh.
I do like the hottest video game hunks of all time.
Yeah, it does pretty much. It's
there.
the first one that comes up when I search this after Reddit, which is your, you know, from our girl gamers.
Oh, good.
Who's your favorite male protagonist, right?
Uh-huh.
Top answer, Kiryu Kazuma. So, targeted to me.
Officially girly approved.
Officially girly. But then we get 10 video game male protagonists with pitch black hearts.
Okay.
Hottest video game hunks of all time.
Yeah.
Ranking the best video game heroes of all time. Favorite male video game character. Top 20 hottest male video game characters. 50 most popular video game characters.
We
immediately go into, like, very generic stuff.
You could say something interesting about a lot of them just being, like, the sexiest men in a video game.
Well, that, like, why else would you be looking that up?
I guess
right?
so, yeah.
We do get on page 2, on Kotaku, this is the first one that is really what I'm looking for. Brooding white male video game protagonists ranked.
It does seem like maybe a joke piece, though.
I mean, yes, certainly, but still.
It seems like maybe it's making fun of this idea, that you would write this about male protagonists.
Yes. We've got a great role models one. The Giant Bomb under their character's male protagonist. This, I imagine, is in alphabetical order, but the preview is for 50 Cent. He's a platinum-selling rapper and the protagonist of a few games centered around himself and G-Unit.
He sure is.
Yeah, I mean, it just does not... We do not get the same... Like, when you look up best female protagonist in games, you immediately get, like, listicles that are like, let's call them out. Whereas it's so interesting to me that the first page with men immediately just goes to, like, good game characters.
Yeah.
It's not interesting to me. It's obvious to me. But it's striking.
Yeah. This is a little bit tangential, but did you read that Variety article that came out this week about, like, Hollywood movie studios, like, dealing with fandom, racist fandom? I mean, they said toxic fandom, but I'm saying racist fandom.
I didn't read it, but it was about, like, the focus groups, right?
Yeah, like, some companies do focus groups with, like, super fans to sort of, like, check their reactions on things, and I just so, like, I feel like if you did that, people do surveys sometimes in video games things, but
yeah.
I feel like if you did that with video games, it would be so bad.
Yeah, probably.
And also, this is tangential, but, like, imagine, like, calling in, like, the super fan focus group for, like, imagine calling in the super fan focus group for The Last of Us 2.
Call in Aurora.
No, like, people who played the first Last of Us, and you're like, okay, here's the scene at the beginning.
Yeah.
Please tell me.
Well, but see, like, here's the thing, right? Like, that is the reaction that they wanted to get. I mean, not the virulent, like, hate.
Yeah.
Right? But, like, the point was that these people would feel hurt and betrayed by this. Right? Yeah. So, like, maybe they did do that, and probably they got the reaction that they expected, or they wanted, and just did not accurately predict what that would turn into online. Also, that's tricky too, right? Like, people aren't gonna, I don't know, I've never been in a focus group, right?
Yeah.
But I tend to think that people who are in person looking at people are not gonna act the way that they do on Twitter.
Sure.
Mostly.
Yeah, mostly.
And so, like, you might get the, like, oh my god, like, I'm angry that happened, but you're not gonna get the, like, I'm gonna find your house and kill you. Yeah. Like, I don't think that most people who type that out online would have the guts to say that to someone in person, like, at the Naughty Dog offices.
Yeah. I also tangentially related, as I was looking for this, there was the odd thing that I found that was like, we all know that female characters are getting uglier and uglier as time goes on. Let's investigate.
Yeah. Can we do that with men, too? Can I start that? We all know they're getting uglier.
I feel like these people would actually be like, we know that the men are being catered to the gaze of females.
Yeah.
The female gaze is turning the men into Bishonen.
The gaze!
They really are, yeah. No, that's what that article would be, yeah.
I'll write that article.
Yeah.
I want to put that out there. I think the world deserves to read that. So, like, what's the future for women in games? Emma? Where how do we fix this? Do we need to fix this?
I do feel like generally things are trending up in the numbers game.
Certainly.
It's just sort of
it was pretty rock bottom, so only way to go is up.
Yeah. even if that's, games shifting from male protagonists to female protagonists, or sharing with a female protagonist or whatever, I do feel like maybe it's the games I play too, though.
Yeah. Sharing with a female protagonist is just not good enough, though. I mean, it is for many games, but it's just like not. I'm just like, our prestige games still, for the most part, have a character that you play as, right?
Yes.
And like there are big games that don't do that, and where character creation is a big part of it. But our like prestige-y, story-y games, for the most part, don't do that. Like they have someone you play as, and the fact that those games are still, more male-dominated, or the fact that those games that are women is still only 20% or whatever, is not good. Is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also we're talking about this, and AAA is dying.
Sure.
In general.
Sure.
So it is hard to like be thinking about this when, in some ways, I feel like the shape of the games industry might be entirely different like 5 years from now.
That's fair.
Because I do think a lot of indies are more balanced, in terms of the things that you can find, right?
Yep.
So, if you're looking for female protagonists, maybe you look outside the box. I mean, I feel like that's unfair to say sometimes, because, like, I'd like a female protagonist in Persona, also.
Right, like a real one.
And I'm not necessarily going to get that same experience in any other sort of indie game that I might find. Right?
Well, it also just speaks to the difficulty of starting a franchise now.
Yeah.
Right?
That's also true, yeah.
That, we can kind of, there's like, in some of these articles, there's a little bit of a grumbly tone, which I think is fine, to the fact of like, oh, we get these, but like, only once we've made a game with like the safe white guy, is it okay to move to the daughter, or is it okay for Alan Wake to share the screen with someone, or is it whatever, like pick any game. Is it okay for us to jump 400 years in the future and the samurai is a lady now, right? And on one hand, I get that, right? It does sort of suck that like the way that we have to get that representation is we have to like test it with something quote unquote safe first, and then we can make the game about someone else. That's not awesome. But I also think that like, well, new IP is just doesn't go new IP doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
New IP, like, it just flops. It flops over and over and over again. Every like new IP game that we've talked about on the show.
Returnal was good.
You're right. Returnal was good. I don't mean, you're right.
Stellar Blade, technically.
Yeah, I know.
Has sold.
You're right. I'm being dramatic in saying every, but I feel like majority of the new IP, like, big swings from some of these big companies that we've talked about on the show this year have been like, and they failed.
Yeah.
And they failed big time.
Yeah.
So given that, I think that it's like okay and reasonable, and I am allowed to make these kinds of moral judgments. That people are like, no, like, actually what I want is a Kingdom Hearts game about Kairi, or a Persona game where you play as a woman, or, whatever. Name your favorite franchise.
Right.
A Final Fantasy game where the gals are on a road trip.
Right.
Haruka to fight.
10-2, technically.
Okay. A new one.
Yeah, a new one.
And like, that's okay, because like, we like those games, and you are not going to get a new IP that is like those games that like succeeds. Like, sorry, you're not. Games just don't succeed anymore. That's the unfortunate fact of the matter, is that like a AAA sized game is now a Broadway musical, Yeah. It does not succeed. It's a bad investment, and you're better off hoping to get the protagonist that you want in a series that is too big to fail.
Yeah. And Sony will then make you remaster that game.
Yeah.
A few times.
You will never be unable to play that game either.
Well, that's that.
That's what I got.
I don't remember what we're talking about next week.
Me either.
I don't have the list in front of me, so we can all be surprised.
Will there be a woman protagonist? Unlikely. Statistically.
It was Limbo, so no.
Yep.
And I don't know what the new game was.
That'll be a fun surprise for
Banishers, Ghosts of New Eden, half.
You mean there's 2 protagonists and 1?
Yes.
Or do you mean there's a half person?
A half woman, no. Well, sort of. Both.
Okay. Look forward to finding out what that means. Listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Are there favorite women protagonists of yours that we did not talk about? Are there characters that you want to, like, argue to us are secretly women? I'll take that, too. Like, fan theories. Here we go.
I welcome any and all trans headcanons that you have.
Yeah.
Honestly. Have fun.
Up that representation count. Do it. Do it. Hades also, right? Like, had to be a man, and then...
They did make Transistor beforehand. And Pyre, you can be male, female, or non-binary.
Bastion was on the Wikipedia list, and I was like, what are you talking about? I was really confused by that.
I don't know.
I was looking for that for the episode. I was like, I know I saw one on the list that did not make sense to me. And Wikipedia has determined that Bastion is about...
Wikipedia is maybe not a perfect source all
I don't know
the
what you're talking about. There's no more reliable source. Anyway, if you have thoughts about women in gaming, and it can't be, why are they getting uglier?
Yeah.
We're just all getting uglier, friends. Like, there's nothing we can do about that. We're all getting uglier every single day.
It's the trade-off for upping your graphics. You now get to see the acne.
Exactly. We couldn't see it before. It was photoshopped out. And now we get to see a high-resolution
women. There weren't
women.
enough pixels.
If you want to support me in writing my, like, listicle about games men, hit us up on social media. Maybe think about how you hit us up on social media about this. Actually, there's a lot of ways. We just talked about how hitting us up on social media might lead to you being meaner than you should be. So think about that first. Think about yourself in the Naughty Dog office, and then hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, which we definitely know what they are, and read our blog featuring long-running series, Split Screen, and Clickbait Boyfriend itself about a male protagonist.
Yeah, true.
Dang. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, you should subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast Pocket Casts, not on YouTube Podcasts, which is what I wanted to say. But anywhere that you can find podcasts, most likely Talk This is there, and you should subscribe, and you should like it, and you should rate it, and you should tell your friends. Next week, as Emma said, we're talking about Limbo and Banishers. Because there's 2 of them.
Yes.
And then in 2 weeks, it'll be 6 weeks of gaming.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I don't know if I have any female protagonists this time around.
I played the Yuffie game.
There you go.
And I'm playing 1,000 Times Resist. Maybe I will only play women protagonists.
Alright, we'll balance it out.
Will not happen. Any of these big games that I'm thinking about starting are about men.
Oh, well.
Alas, the streak is broken. Is Balatro? Are you a female? I'm a female protagonist when I play Balatro.
Yeah, true.
I haven't played it in weeks, folks.
All right.
This is just a log that I haven't played it in weeks. The mobile port did not get me.
Madelyn, do you want to sign us off?
Sure. This week, I hope that you put some detailed thought into your list of the best video game hunks of the last decade.